Ontario's Housing Affordability Task Force has a report out today that recommends a goal of building 1.5 million homes in 10 years. The government-appointed task force says house prices in Ontario have nearly tripled in the last 10 years, far outpacing income growth and a lack of supply. That is a key issue.
The Ford government identified 5 main areas included in the report's 55 recommendations. Make changes to planning policies and zoning to allow for greater density and increase the variety of housing. Reduce and streamline urban design rules to lower costs of development. Depoliticize the approvals process to address NIMBYism and cut red tape to speed up housing. NIMBYism is not in my backyard. Prevent abuse of the appeal process and address the backlog at the Ontario Land Tribunal by prioritizing cases that increase housing. And finally, align efforts between all levels of government to incentivize more housing. To discuss this report, we welcome to CP24 tonight Richard Lyall, President of Residential Construction Council of Ontario, and Marlene Coffey, CEO of the Ontario Nonprofit Housing Association. We appreciate both of you making time to talk about this report. Richard, it seems like this report is recommending we cut through a lot of red tape on the municipal level to encourage more construction. What's your perspective?
Well, I'm still kind of pinching myself because I've been at this for 30-odd years. And, the problem that the crisis we have has been decades in the making. It was like a slow-moving freight train. The problem was you had different levels of government and different actors not aligned, and you didn't have housing policies aligned with transit policies, with immigration. The growth plan, for example, was working off of old demographics, which was quite shocking, and there was a lack of data. So this thing kind of crept up on us. And then it became a problem before COVID, and then COVID just rammed it home. And so I'm delighted that we now have a very comprehensive strategy here with this task force report, and hopefully it'll get adopted, to address the broad range of issues. I mean, the number of recommendations in the report reflect the complexity of the problem that we've been dealing with.
Marlene, I want to get your thoughts. What did you make of this report, and will it help low-income families find the housing they need?
Well, thank you for the question. The report is a really important piece as we look forward to building in Ontario that is really inclusive for all communities. And so we know that not-for-profit housing is to housing what hospitals are to healthcare or what schools are to education. And so it's absolutely critical that as we look at complete communities, that we include community housing as part of that spectrum, the continuum. If we think about housing where homelessness is on one end of the continuum and housing ownership is on the other end of the continuum, we, of course, are very interested in that part in the middle, which is about rental housing and affordability, and most importantly, deep affordability for Ontarians.
And that word densification that we heard the mayor use today, Marlene, could that help when we consider rental properties, or at least, building on top of each other so we can have more space to live in the same location?
Well, there isn't any one singular solution here to addressing the housing crisis. Rather, there's a combination of policies and regulations and tools that can be offered to the development community to ensure that we're building those inclusive and complete communities. So density is one of those solutions. Transit-oriented development would be another one. And there are so many parts of the funding model to enable us, to help us become part of that equation for development of affordable housing in Ontario.
Yeah, affordability is such a huge issue here. Richard, 55 recommendations. The plan is to build 1.5 million homes in 10 years. When I hear that, I think that's rather ambitious. What do you think? Can this happen?
Hey, well, you know what I say? Go big or go home, right? It's going to be a heck of a challenge because we do have other challenges right now facing the industry, and I'm hoping that we'll get through some of them. But things like supply chain problems, we have a skilled labor shortage, and this is where we're looking at immigration changes. And of course, we've been at the training and apprenticeship reform process for some time. And the province of Ontario is really, Minister McNaughton's all over that. that's looking quite good. So yeah, it's going to be a challenge, but I think we can do it. I look, I was very pleased in the report that it said that the Deputy Minister of Housing be given the authority to create an all-government committee to meet weekly as this or whatever. I mean, I'm hoping the government really goes ahead with this, but as this gets implemented, it's going to be monitored. It's not going to be another report that's going to sit on a shelf, and we can't afford that. We're behind every other developed jurisdiction that counts, and our process. And this is the key thing about this report that I think has to be appreciated. It's really focused on the supply side of things and fixing the systemic barriers, which are many, to housing. And I'm looking forward to, and I see the government has said that they're going to be dealing with some core affordability issues in social housing right after this. So, because that needs to be addressed too, because we have people in our community that, through no fault of their own, can't pay for housing, and we have to obviously support those people and do something about it, and in fact do a much better job about it, because part of this crisis has been that ever-growing list of people looking for social housing and needing it, and it's critical. But for now, let's fix the systemic barriers and the problems, many of which are they shouldn't have been there in the first place, but they're there, and streamline this process, and we'll get to building housing. We're going to need some innovation here. We're going to be doing modular, offsite, panelized housing, all kinds of really neat things to affect this, because we have to.
Yeah, it's a crisis, and time is of essence here. But then when you think about the red tape that's going to be cut, it's consultations, it's environmental concerns, maybe it's NIMBYism, not in my backyard, right? And when we talk about social housing, sometimes we see that reaction. Marlene, do you think that cutting red tape will help improve things for people who are looking for a place to live?
Well, we're certainly in a housing crisis, and that means a couple of things. So development and supply is part of the solution, but we also have to ensure that we're protecting the stock that we currently have. So over time, over those 30 years, there has been investment into community housing, which is part of our social infrastructure. And it's absolutely essential that we maintain those assets and are in the position where not-for-profit community housing can actually build to add to the supply. So we have created a 10-year affordable housing plan for the province of Ontario, which lines up with the National Housing Strategy on a 10-year time horizon. And what we identified there is that we need to build, and this was pre-COVID, 99,000 new units of affordable community housing to be part of that continuum so that people have choice as they move up and down the housing spectrum. Within the 99,000 units that we've identified, we know that 22,000 of those units need to be dedicated and committed to Indigenous housing and new development. And of course, we know supportive housing is also important, and we need an additional 30,000 units to make sure that the proper supports are there for families, for senior citizens, for new Canadians, and single-parent households.
Marlene, we've been talking about this housing crisis, all the red tape. Richard's been talking about systemic barriers. I want to ask you how all of this impacts young people and racialized communities.
Well, hey, that's something it's pardon me for jumping in, but, we've done a horrible disservice to young people, millennials, Gen Xers, and so on, who have, we've got incredible talent, incredible young people in the province, and needless to say, they've done everything that we want them to do, get college, get education, a skilled trade, hopefully. And then they come out and they're success stories. And guess what? They can't afford the housing. It's unsustainable. And more recently, we're seeing reports of, we're losing talent to other jurisdictions because our housing costs are too high. I saw a thing where a major bank just set up a new data center in Calgary, and one of the reasons was the housing costs in Toronto were too high. So we really need to do a better job to support them and, support their futures. If you think of all the condos we have downtown, great, serving the STEM sector and things like that. Where's the traditional housing, transitional housing, so they don't have to go way outside of Toronto to get something affordable? I'm looking forward to. We've got that Portland's area, which is ideal for building family-styled apartments in that area. If we can get this right, we'll be able to do that, and they'll be able to transition, not far away. Things like that, and don't forget, that whole area it's the biggest redevelopment site in North America. We need to move on it, and I'm hoping that this will create the impetus to really move that forward a little bit faster and make those connections. And then when you look at our densities, one of the problems we had was we created a growth plan, and we decided not to have more urban sprawl, which is great, but then they forgot the density offset, right? There wasn't enough of that done to compensate for reducing sprawl. So now we're going to really get to that and fix that problem. So
okay.
I'm very excited about this.
Okay, we've run out of time, but Marlene, I'll give you maybe 15 seconds to answer that and talk about the people this touches.
Yeah, community housing is an important part of that continuum, and access to financing and ensuring that we maintain affordable housing stock is absolutely key to building and growing communities.
Okay, Richard Lyall and Marlene Coffey. We'll have to leave it there. Thanks so much for your insight. We certainly appreciate your time tonight.